Hi guys, so Lord Frost, the current member of the House of Lords and former Brexit negotiator for Boris Johnson's government, the man who hammered out the withdrawal agreement and the TCA with the European Union, the man who then trashed the former just over a year after it began to be implemented, spoke to the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Why he was invited is beyond me. Perhaps someone pulled out at the last minute. But he spoke about a number of issues, but of course I want to focus on his pièce de la résistance, Brexit. He starts off by talking about how it wasn't really economic, which is strange. However, the entire theme of this talk was about ignoring the immediate, tangible problems of today and instead focus on the abstract benefits of the future.
I'm doing so because it's relevant in quite a few ways, I think. First of all, it's relevant because many observers and commentators on Brexit still cannot see beyond the immediate economic costs.
Now, I don't want to stop it so soon, but we can't see beyond the immediate economic costs. Well, Brexiteers, like Frost, were saying, as soon as we leave, there will be immediate benefits. There will be no costs. People like him, David Davis and others said, there will be only upsides, there will be no downsides to Brexit. Even Frost himself hinted at the idea that as soon as we left the European Union, the benefits would be clear for everyone to see. Well, they're not clear, and now you're going back on the idea that there would be any costs related to Brexit.
Those who advocated Brexit were, for the most part, looking at the long term.
No, they were not. Once again, many of them said as soon as we leave, we would see the benefits.
Plan was to put in place the conditions which would make us more successful as a country. Crucially, we knew that probably couldn't be achieved without a short-run economic cost, albeit one nowhere near as high as many of our critics suggested. We accepted that was a necessary price to pay to get us out of a fundamentally social democratic organisation with rigid rules.
How come this was never said at the time? How come it was never said, I'm sorry, certain industries are going to have to suffer in order for us to get our democracy back or our sovereignty back? This was never said at the time. It was said instead that all businesses would benefit. The entire economy would benefit from Brexit. Now he's trying to sell the idea that, well, we told people at the time, yes, certain industries would be sacrificed for the greater good. But that's a lie. Nobody said that at the time.
Instead, we're focusing on the consequences that, to use Robespierre terms, were, quote, more distant and not foreseeable at first sight. For example, we had in mind issues such as the UK's persistently poor performance in business investment. Our opponents argued we were making this problem worse by cutting ourselves off from the EU single market. We argued, in contrast, that the UK's problem here went back decades, had arguably been made worse by EU membership because of the geographic distortions created in our economy and the disincentives for investment in human capital because of free movement, and that giving ourselves extra levers to deal with it after Brexit would help us, not hinder us.
He's just talking gobbledygook here. He's not making any sense. So he's trying to suggest that there were problems while we were a member of the European Union. He actually said it goes back decades, so I don't know if he's also talking about before EU membership. But there wasn't real investment in the country because we were also a member of the European Union. I really don't understand what he's trying to get at here. And the idea that once we leave, now we'll be able to welcome more investment into the country. And I have to go back to the Brexiteer rhetoric. Businesses and countries would be queuing up to invest in Britain. Well, this hasn't happened. And also in many cases, the opposite has happened. Large investment has gone way past Britain to countries like Germany or to Ireland.
In short, what was seen was the cost. What was not seen is the long-term potential gains. provided, of course, and this is in our hands, we take the measures that enable us to capture them.
So another part of the rhetoric that you hear from people like Frost, and Frost in particular, is that, yes, the reason the country isn't doing well is not because of Brexit, it's because Boris Johnson and his government have not seized the opportunities. They've not pulled the levers of power in order to drive Brexit forward, to drive the country forward. There are no benefits. If there are benefits, point them out. Give us the tangible examples of how leaving the European Union has benefited Britain. We're almost a year and a half in, and we still haven't seen any benefits yet.
Second area of relevance, it underlines that Brexit was not just about economics. The economic numbers are seen, but the politics are taken for granted. This is about democracy.
Look, I'm trying not to laugh, okay? You have an unelected bureaucrat, a member of the House of Lords, standing up in front of an audience talking about democracy. Who elected Lord Frost? Nobody elected him. Boris Johnson chose him, put him in the House of Lords, made him a minister. He's not accountable to anyone apart from Boris Johnson. He's not accountable to the people, and he's standing there talking about democracy.
We believe that democracy is important, that running your own affairs as a country is important, that having proper debate about things rather than leaving it to a technocracy is important.
Now, I think he either doesn't understand the European Union or he's pretending not to. He's trying to suggest to these people that the European Union doesn't have a parliament, doesn't have a proportional representation parliament, which can be argued is much more democratic than a first-past-the-post parliament. But once again, he's in no position to talk about democracy. But I think a big problem for viewers of this is that Brexiteers try to act as if Britain was never really a member of the European Union. It never took part in the decision making. The decisions were taken by someone else and imposed upon Britain.
And I'm confident, I know this is a point well understood in Switzerland, with its strong tradition of democracy, direct democracy and referendums. In the EU, the political communities are still to a large extent national, but many of the policies are supranational. As a result, many things can't be decided by national elections. Many key issues, economic policy, environmental policy, energy policy, increasingly even foreign policy, migration policy, are decided at the EU level. Some issues like trade policy are not subject to meaningful scrutiny even at that level.
What the hell am I hearing here? His government, Boris Johnson's party, voted in Parliament, forced Parliament not to scrutinise deals. So remember all these trade deals that Frost and Boris Johnson were talking about. Look, once we leave, we'll have these wonderful trade deals. The Tory party, using their 80-seat majority, voted down the possibility of scrutinising trade deals. So, people who live in glass houses really shouldn't be throwing stones here.
Voting can't really change these things for EU members. And this is surely part...
I'm sorry to be interrupted. Voting? Who can vote him out? Can you vote Lord Frost out of the House of Lords? He really should shut up about this point.
That's the reason why voters' confidence in their institutions across Europe, as last week's polling by the European Council on Foreign Relations shows, is at such a low ebb. This matters. So far, the best way humankind has found of promoting mass flourishing and happiness is the democratic nation-state.
We've seen over the last number of weeks how unity is better than the type of statehood that Lord Frost and Boris Johnson want to create with their Brexit, a sort of European North Korea, cutting ourselves off from the rest of Europe, cutting ourselves off from our biggest market. cutting ourselves off diplomatically, economically, politically. Once again, I think this guy is operating on another wavelength. I think his mindset is stuck back in 2016. The world has moved on from that. We can see how issues such as COVID, we can see issues such as the war in what's happening in Ukraine, how unity is more important than individual countries acting alone.
And in my view, this is because being part of a successful national democracy also has an economic payoff. Free markets are the best way of creating growth, but they bring churn and change. People are most likely to put up with that if they feel they're part of a successful national community in which everyone has a stake, which everyone can shape, in which everything can be debated, and where policies can be adjusted and errors corrected.
But once again, you and your group of individuals, your Brexiteers, want to remove protections for workers, for the environment. And we've seen, there was a report even today, or a few days ago, where it's going to be even easier for businesses to pump raw sewage and pollutants into rivers and lakes. A Brexit benefit, it seems. Things that would have been... Yes, look, is the EU perfect? Far from perfect. The EU is far from perfect. But it can be reformed. How do you challenge a government with an 80-seat majority who fills the House of Lords with sycophants and yes men and yes women? How do you stop that? How do you hold Boris Johnson to account?
That's what I hope we are trying to create or recreate in Britain. Elections now matter. Arguments have to be won by politicians in national debate. That's why I say that if the integrity of our national democracy requires a bit more paperwork at the borders, then I'm ready to pay that price.
The sheer arrogance of this man. He's not paying any price. Somebody else is paying that price. He's standing here at this lectern, on this podium, saying, I'm willing to pay a price, which of course he's not willing to pay. He's not paying it. Somebody else is paying it. So the idea that, yes, it's okay that we threw certain industries under a bus because there's something more abstract in the long term. That goal is worth any sacrifice. He sounds like a general who's talking about how we need to invade a certain country out of principle, when he's not going to be doing the fighting. Somebody else is going to be doing the fighting. Other people are going to suffer, but Lord Frost is willing to make that sacrifice on their behalf.
In the medium term, the value of being in a successful democratic nation state that makes its own choices far outweighs it. Third area of relevance. This way of thinking explains some key features of the negotiations to leave, in which I took so close a part. Under Boris Johnson's predecessor, Theresa May, the government seemed committed to Brexit only institutionally and formally, not economically, a sort of simulacrum of leaving. It seemed to believe Brexit brought only costs and focused on minimising them.
And what have we seen? Nothing but costs. I've yet to hear any benefits. You haven't actually presented any benefits. Anything we can look at and say, okay, this is a real benefit of leaving the European Union. He talked about democracy, somebody who's unelected talking about democracy. He's talking about sacrifices that need to be made, though he's not going to make those sacrifices himself. Somebody else is.
In that, they shared the view of the EU negotiators. And indeed, Michel Barnier said on several occasions that, quote, Brexit was always a matter of damage limitation.
The Northern Ireland Protocol is about damage limitation, something that you negotiated. How does this guy operate? What goes through his head when he's actually writing this script that he's reading out? Is it trolling? Is it just taking the piss? Does he actually think, is he insulting his audience by saying these things?
As a result, it felt to us that the May government got into a kind of complicity with the EU negotiators. They both understood each other because they both had the same goal. And it's not surprising that things ended badly with a treaty in 2018 and 2019 that could not get through our parliament. So the Boris Johnson government, in which I was a part, couldn't get into that game. When we came in 2019, we took a different view, that the costs had to be paid, sovereignty had to be recovered, so
Once again, somebody else has to be thrown under a bus.
we could get on the right track for the future. We recognised we had to reset the negotiations up to that point, to make it clear that we are not complicit in the process, but standing up robustly for the UK's interests.
What interests? You banged on about fishing, which represents about the same size as the lawnmower industry. Erasmus was thrown in the bin for political reasons, not for economic reasons, not because of some cost that the UK would have to pay, economically or politically. You decided, because it has European on the front of it, that's the reason we're going to throw it in the bin. Many industries are suffering because of Brexit, but you don't care, obviously. That was a price worth paying.
We also understood we would have to prioritise. Our priority was to deliver the referendum result, which we did, and to achieve full freedom for the future.
Once again, abstract concepts, freedom for the future. Freedom from what? You were a member of a club. You partook in that club. You had voting rights in that club. You also have you had a veto. If there was something that you were dead set against, you could have vetoed it.
That we achieved for Great Britain and in many respects for Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, we couldn't achieve everything we wanted to in 2019 for Northern Ireland. But we did at least ensure that the unusual arrangements effectively imposed on us at least had to have the consent of the Northern Irish Assembly if they were to be sustained.
So your hands were tied. But then why did you sign it? Why didn't you say, look, we can't sign this. We need more time to negotiate. The European Union were saying, look, if you need more time to negotiate, we can extend the grace period, the transition period. We can extend it for 2 years if you want, or even longer. And you said, no, we want this all done and dusted. We want both the TCA and the withdrawal agreement signed as quickly as possible. And of course, by doing that, you ended up with agreeing to things that you probably didn't even read. And then you forced it through Parliament without allowing Parliament to scrutinise it, your own MPs to scrutinise it, and now you're complaining about it, saying our hands were tied. Or he didn't say it here, but he has said it on other occasions, how it was Theresa May's fault because she signed up to things that I hadn't agreed to, and I was forced to agree to these things. Nobody forced your hand to sign that document. You did it. And you didn't come out immediately after saying, look, I'm sorry, we signed this document, but we're not happy with it. It's a massive compromise, but there was nothing else we could do. No, Boris Johnson went on a tour of his oven-ready deal. And you were standing there right beside him, smiling like I don't know what, about how wonderful this trade deal or this oven-ready deal is. You can't take that back now. Be a man. Take responsibility for your action.
And I'll comment a bit more on the implications of this in a moment. Again, in the free trade negotiations that followed in 2020, we again prioritised freedom for the future. I'm not sure that Michel Barnier ever quite understood that, and that was
No, I didn't. It's like, you're prioritising a fishing industry, which is about the same size as your lawnmower industry, but you're saying it's about freedom. Why did you do that? Doesn't make any sense. Probably Michel Barnier was confused. He said, wouldn't you think the British would be prioritising important industries? Wouldn't you think they would want to... They keep talking about freedom of goods, about free trade, things like this, but they keep wanting to put more and more barriers in place. They could have been a member of the single market and the customs union. They said, no, we want to be a third country. We explained to them the problems of that, and they said, we don't care. We are special.
At the root of many of the misunderstandings and confrontations we had in 2020. The EU side saw a zero tariffs free trade agreement as a privilege for which we ought to be prepared to pay a price in terms of governance by the Court of Justice and single market-like level playing field provisions.
That you agreed to. If you didn't want to agree, if you didn't want to do this, then you shouldn't have agreed the contract, the international contract. Like if I go out to buy a mobile phone contract and I read, like maybe Lord Frost didn't actually read the contract, but if I read it and I find something I disagree with, then I don't sign it. I go somewhere else. But he's in a position where he could have signed it, or he could have said, I'm not going to sign it. But at the end of the day, he signed it. And immediately after, he was saying, yes, everything's great, everything's wonderful. It just took some time after that for him to realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have actually signed this. Or maybe he was just trying to, from a political point of view, extract some type of concession later on.
For our part, we saw zero tariffs as something highly desirable to smooth the transition out of the EU, but certainly not something for which we were prepared to pay a long-run sovereignty price.
Sovereignty. Once again, what the hell does that mean?
We seriously contemplated no deal at many points in 2020. But in the end, we were able to reach agreement because both sides were willing to take a risk in the wider interest. And one of the key tools in this was the so-called rebalancing clause. That's Article 411 for those who know the TCA well. And this article allows either side to put in place trade defence provisions if there's strain in the trade relationship, and has a degree of automaticity in enabling a renegotiation if this happens too often. I think it's an interesting and important provision. I want to take this opportunity first to pay a particular tribute to one of my deputies in the talks in 2020, Oliver Lewis, who helped us come up with this concept. And second, to put on record that I think this aspect of the agreement has been widely misunderstood. All the commentators at the end of 2020 saw it as a provision to bring us and the EU closer together in future. The point was almost exactly the opposite. It was about providing for controlled further distancing between us if either side thought it was unreasonably threatened by an open trading relationship.
This man is an arsonist. He's not interested in businesses in Britain trading. He's interested in some sort of political control over... once again, I've said this before, I don't know what Lord Frost's end goal is. What does he want? Does he want to become Prime Minister someday? Does he want to become a senior minister? Does he want to run for public office? I don't know. Is this just a money-making scheme he has? Giving speeches and getting paid for it? I don't know. But the idea that someone who's unelected, someone who would be willing to destroy his own economy for some sort of political pipe dream is, as I said, an arsonist. He doesn't care about the consequences for British businesses. He doesn't care about the consequences for British citizens. That's completely alien to him, the idea of caring about these businesses or these citizens. It seems to be, I don't know, a power trip he has. It's all about me. It's all about Brexit. It's all about democracy, even though I'm not a Democrat. It's always about free trade, even though we voted and we put in place barriers to free trade. It's just nonsensical. And I think at the end of the day, it's a deep hatred for Europe. It's anti-Europeanism. Not Euroscepticism, it's anti-Europeanism. This idea that they're inferior to us and we need to show them that. I can't come to any other conclusion. It's this idea that we used to be an empire. You need to show us respect. We'll become an empire again. We have to get out of the European Union in order to achieve that. It's insane, but I can't think of any other conclusion to the rhetoric over the last number of years surrounding Brexit and the actions taken by both Boris Johnson and his chief negotiator, Lord Frost. It's confused the EU because they thought that this would be a nation that wants, okay, it wants to leave, but it wants to have a relationship with Europe on trade, just on the issue of trade. But I think there's a deep misunderstanding on the Brexiteer side of what the European Union is and what it represents. I'll leave a link in the description of this video to the entire interview, the entire speech. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.